Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I wanted to thank you all for joining us on a Friday morning. I can't believe spring's in the air. April's already here. Q1 is already done. 2025 is flying by, thank God. Want to thank you all for joining us today. Our LinkedIn Live topic is how to automate cybersecurity and vendor manage it to survive compliance. This topic is near and dear to us at Rhyno, being a small company. We've been learning, and we have with us today Matt Lipkowski, who's the president of Business Automation Experts, a good friend to myself and to the Rhyno team. He is our cyber expert and helps us out with everything when it comes to cyber and compliance. Welcome, Matt. Hope everything's going well today.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, love it. Why don't you do a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll get into the topic. Again, like I said, this one, I'm going to pretty much handle the hosting details. You are definitely the subject matter expert. But as I said, this is something that we've come into play quite a bit this year, and definitely are interested in seeing how we can improve ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my career started in the 90s. I worked in the automotive. I actually did a lot of things in ISO 9000. And actually, it was QS 9000, but it was a version of ISO. And I wrote a thesis project. So I wrote software that would help us kind of keep track of a lot of documents and things and put that into a database. So kind of translate what people think and say, and then you try to put that into something that's actually actionable. So this has sort of been, I don't know, a 30+ year odyssey. And I eventually moved to New Jersey from Michigan, was CIO of a company, and I liked the dynamic of working with smaller organizations versus the large ones, and have always been sort of passionate about helping what I would consider my neighbors. And I like to see how they can grow and, help them get some of those obstacles out of the way. We started in 2005. My background has always been software development, and you kind of come across a lot of challenges for people. In the 2014-ish era, there were several things that were coming across our desk that had to do with cybersecurity. People were really coming to us like, uh-oh, my company shut down. What do I do? And that then spawns, okay, what's really going on? As an electrical engineer, I will always try to figure out what's really at the bottom, right? Like what are some root causes to some of these challenges? And then what can be done to build upon sort of simple things to help meet the needs of organizations. And to this day, I still see a lot of disjointed processes around compliance and a lot of regulations that are basically mandating certain things. And so you will see, I will separate two things as regulatory and let's call it compliance.
Yeah.
Compliance is effectively optional, right? Because you can decide, I want to do a SOC 2. I will decide to do a high trust. Regulation, you got to do it. And so they're taking more things from these compliance frameworks and moving them to the you got to do it. And that is adding to the burden for people.
Yeah.
Now, compliance frameworks are helpful because you kind of get a taste of actually doing it. And you will talk to companies who do this for a living, and they will come with a particular perspective. But always understand every compliance framework over here is built on a perspective. And so when they come into your company, they have certain wants, needs, and desires that might not be your wants, needs, and desires. And you have to negotiate those pieces so that you can get to what you're trying to get to, which many times is, hi, I'm certified as blah. And that will facilitate things that you will find on vendor agreements. So if you're a smaller organization, the big guys get to be big and they can say, thou shalt have this, right? And if you don't, then we're going to have certain extra things that will complicate your life because they don't necessarily want to have a problem from a resiliency perspective, right? A lot of this is, great, you're going to come, you're going to do this stuff. I love you to death. But if you can't handle things appropriately, if you don't have your big boy pants on, you're going to mess me up. And I don't want that. And so,
and we find from our side that can stop everything right there. So it's interesting that you're saying required, compliance, regulatory, resiliency, and tying that all together, because I think as we get to this conversation, we're going to see that the more and more we can bring that together uniformly, the better off we're going to be. I mean, I'll just give a little experience from our side, from the Rhyno perspective. We partner with a lot of provider and payer organizations, very large organizations. And to your point here, so we did an MSA a year or so ago. We had to do a cybersecurity questionnaire, and thank you. You were helpful in us successfully passing that. And there was a bunch of stuff they asked, and we went through it. We had to do one just recently, a couple months ago, and it was a lot more detailed, specifically on the vendor management part. And we can all understand why. With everything that's happened last year, your vendor partners are so key to your business, especially in the provider and the payer side in healthcare, and in defense and finance as well, but obviously in healthcare, that they become a critical part and they can't bring risk to your business. So all this stuff is coming together. You take a company, we're a niche company, we're a nice sized company, medium sized company, but we don't have a dedicated compliance office. And so how do you manage all that together? And I think we'll go through that today.
Yeah, and what I will say is I view it a little bit like accounting, right? You technically do not need an accountant to run your business. If you go get a bank loan, you got to have accounting, right? So I'm seeing that these compliance things, regulations, compliance frameworks, whatever they are different form of, it's under the guise of risk management. But what the payoff is access, right? So if you don't do these things, you have no access to come in and actually, do your job, do the work. Exactly. Yeah. So it is becoming this relationship of this is over here and this is what you need on the other side of this. And that usually means this is not going away at all. And it's going to kind of inch up.
If anything, it's going in the other direction. It's going to grow and continue to grow and become core to everything we do, and especially in healthcare, it's going to become a requirement. All right, let's start with the compliance burden. Let's start. I'll start firing off some questions to you. Let's talk about the burden of compliance in general. I mean, obviously, there's multiple areas that you need to be able to score yourself in. Obviously, there's HIPAA and there's high trust and all those types of things, but there's also SOX and all these other things that we'll talk about. And each of those come with, each of those are unique standards, and each of those come with their own set of rules and costs that need to be incorporated into your business structure as well. So why don't you just take a moment and, which regulatory frameworks are the most challenging to vendors that you find today as they're trying to build their compliance portfolio?
Okay, so pretty much all of it boils down to policies, right? So you have to have written policies in order to meet any of these things. And given that the regulations say thou shalt have these things, you have to have policies. So if you're starting a company off, you do a business plan. But if you're going to be in the healthcare space, you better get some policies and procedures and think through a bunch of these things, because in healthcare, we're going to make you sign a business associate agreement. That's a legal document that says you're doing this stuff, right? So you need to know, am I touching personal health information? And you can try to come up with some shortcuts and say, all right, hold on, I don't want that data. Like if your business plan is such that you're going to have the data, different conversation. But if you're doing advisory work, if you're coming in, you're cleaning the place, if you're doing these different pieces, understand what your risk is, because your client is very concerned about your risk that you bring to them. Yeah. And so you have to think about that language. Where do I meet them on this risk element? And then what am I going to put in place to control that stuff, right? So if you're doing staff augmentation, you better do background searches, right? Because it's going to be a manager. And you better have a policy that says that you do this stuff, because there are government agencies that say, hey, you can't discriminate against people. You can't do this, can't do that. And if you don't have a policy that has sort of been vetted and appropriate, you will then have a new risk where you will be talking to some attorneys.
Matt, just hold for 1 second. We're getting some great comments right now. So just hold on for a minute. I want to make sure everyone's aware we are monitoring the comments. We will get to all of your questions. The first one that I see there is, how do you maintain transparency and audit readiness in a fully automated process? I think we'll get to that down the road. We're going to talk about the automation in a little bit, so please hang tight on that. And there's another comment coming in from aligning your cybersecurity automation with established risk management frameworks. These are great things. Just bear tight. We'll get to everything that's on here. And obviously, I want to say hello to Mark and Chris and Constantine. It's nice to see you guys as well. Appreciate you joining. It's been a while, but it's great to see you all. I apologize, Matt. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we are monitoring that.
Yeah, it's a live event. That's how it goes.
All right. So, and agree. What you're saying is, and I think you said something important there. And this is, and I'm not sure how flexible some of these things are, but you said you need to meet with your partners, and you need to meet with the clients, and you need to meet with the customers on what you're going to do. Well, sometimes that meeting is 50-50. Sometimes that meeting is 90-10, and sometimes that meeting is do it or go away. So to your point, we do staff aug at Rhyno, so we clearly do all kinds of background checks and store all that, and have to deal with agencies and security and all that type of stuff. And those policies are in place. But I think to your point, and as we'll get further along, it's going to grow. Those policies need to increase. Those policies need to become more mature. And that's not something you do once a year anymore. Now it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, but I mean, fundamentally, it starts with that. Like, if you're going to have anybody coming in, regulatory or compliance, the first thing they pull for you are your policies and procedures, right? So you may have certain standard operating procedures. Those have to be written down. They should be somewhat structured. They can't just be, well, he sent me an email, I did this stuff. You will get in trouble. Or more precisely, it will cost you a ton of money and time if you don't have some of this kind of baseline stuff in place. Now, you have the ability to define some of these things, and therefore you should think about, how do I get this to be with this, right? We spend more time kind of working with clients to say, like, these things should be cohesive, because many times people will kind of buy a book, right? Like, oh, I need to meet the HIPAA security rule. They buy the book.
Compliance for dummies, right? Everyone goes and gets compliance for dummies.
Yeah, I open the book and it says insert company name here. So you go like, all right, you haven't read this, have you? You like, this is foundational to access to customers. Okay, so understand, it isn't really going to be optional. It technically really isn't optional, but you need to care about this stuff when you're running a company, because this is the stuff that will end you.
Yep.
And
so when people reach out to you, Matt, I mean, obviously you've been doing this for a long time, and initially it was, hey, we got this problem. Now it's oh my God, we got this problem. What's the biggest thing that they're concerned about? What's the biggest pain point? And again, for everyone on the call, we're talking about the manual work that we're doing now, and then we'll get into the automation piece. What's the biggest thing that people are afraid of?
All right. So different panicked phone calls come across our desk. They will range from, our system is demolished, what do we do now? To I need to get to some objective. How do I get there, right? And we have participated in several things where clients are like, we deal with these groups of people. We want to deal with these groups of people, bigger paychecks.
Yep.
And so what types of things do we need to do to get from, dealing with mom and pop to dealing with big boys? And it's always this kind of layer of, okay, well, they're really going to want to understand that you have policies and processes. You can't go talk to those guys without that, because they want to know that you're going to do what you say you do, and you're going to be able to repeat it. And so it's a foundational component of trust for growth.
Okay, let's and you said something really, really important early on. And again, before we even get into how to automate it and how to go from manual automation, you were bridging the gap between security and compliance. They used to be handled separately, even be handled by two separate teams, potentially within large organizations. But they're becoming more and more integrated into each other, or at least respectful of each other. So, what's the best methodology? How can companies ensure that they're bridging the security requirements that they need to fill with the compliance requirements?
Yeah, so there are more platforms that are available. So I usually look at, you can kind of think about it like a security camera, right? If you can find the platforms, a lot of them are effectively sucking up server exhaust, right? Well, you need network exhaust, what's communicating to what. You need the logs of these systems, like what rule on the firewall got hit and didn't get hit, and et cetera. And then, hey, my server is doing these types of things on a regular basis. All of that has to come into something. And a lot of times I see them go in a lot of places. But you can't see anything if you have this camera over here and all it looks at is this, and this camera over here and all it looks at is that. You want to see the whole picture. You are creating a problem for your organization if everything is siloed, which does happen a lot. And a lot of the security vendors, certainly the older ones, the Symantec's, the McAfee's, like those guys, they kind of built their stuff by buying this company. They're like, oh, he's got a cool tool, I'll buy that. So then they can just sell you a menu of things, but nothing works together. So you need to find the stuff that actually plays nice, or maybe was architected to begin with to say, all right, I'm going to suck in all these things because it's really important to work. At the security, a core concept of security, it's really not the people that are coming in that are the problem. It's all the people inside, right? Everything that I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. I'm going to say 95%, 98% was your person, right? It was somebody that you already trusted. They were there. They had access to something, and oops, and now you got a calamity. And how do you do that at scale? That's the real question. You need to be able to actually monitor all these things. Now, there are things that people are talking about, this zero trust framework, like, what is it, right? And it varies. This vendor says, I'm zero trust because I'll make you zero trust certified because I can just, I can do identity, I'll do MFA. Only
Right.
One thing, trust me, that's zero trust.
It's not.
You need to actually see everything. You wouldn't, if you're in a building, you wouldn't have the camera just on the front door. If all your employees come in the back door, you better put a camera there. So you need to have these types of things in place, and they're available, and they aren't necessarily gonna, bust your budget. So, thankfully, these things are approachable.
So while we're talking about this as well, and again, I know we're leading into more conversation. There's some great comments that I'm reading through here, and there's one at the bottom here, which I think they're asking, which should you use in these different scenarios? Did you want to take a look at that now, or do you want to hold that for later?
Can I see? Is it an
Just got
accounting?
highlighted.
Oh, I
It's
see. It's an accounting.
1117, exactly.
What should I use for cybersecurity automation and Fed compliance? The NIST for InfoSec, 27,005, executive risk integration cost. Yeah. All right. So it comes down to who's the customer, what are they potentially going to require? In many times the customer is going to pick this for you, right? So
that is true.
The more common ones I will see will be NIST 800. More people are kind of looking at that one. There's a couple flavors to it, but NIST 800 will be there. I will see SOC 2. I will see High Trust. I will see CMMC. These things are going to be in certain contracts, and you can ask based on that client, like, well, what are you usually doing? Now, even if you had that, they always have more questions because all of the frameworks have gaps. They all look at certain things, right? So if I take SOC 2 in particular, SOC 2 is from CPAs, and it came from how do we ensure that people are appropriately managing somebody's data on their behalf. Okay. Yeah. You're doing taxes this time of year, right? You give it to the CPA. You want that CPA to be a good steward of your data, because not good if he's not, right? Like all your tax records are out there. That's not going to be fun. So there are different types, and data centers typically get a SOC 2. So some of the frameworks for a while allow you to grandfather things. SOC 2 doesn't really do it as much anymore, but years ago, what would happen is you could put your application in AWS. AWS is SOC 2, SOC 3, they've got a bunch of stuff. Azure, same kind of thing. You would then be able to get a certificate that said, I am mostly SOC 2 compliant because all of your data, all my stuff is here.
Right.
So pass, right? Like great value for putting your dollars into a cloud framework.
Yep.
CPAs got wind of that. They said, oh, we won't be able to make that much money if we just let it happen. And so, yeah, it's not, it helps, but you're still on the hook for all these other things. And they are still going to come in there and be like, hey, where's your policies? Like, your policy can't be, well, my data center handles that. It's never acceptable. So,
and we've seen that with some of our clients. So one of the things that Matt and I do together in some work is we do integration work for a third-party application into Epic Systems, the EMR. And so we deal with several large provider organizations. Can't name them, unfortunately, but the large academic medical centers in the United States. And for that exact reason, even though our software is in the cloud, we've had to go through that next level of documenting everything for them, because saying that's nice, but and that just becomes that transition from maturity and them asking more and more things, I think, to Matt's point.
Yeah. So some of them have a thing for software development lifecycle, SDLC. That isn't always in some of the frameworks. And if I sit on the SOC 2 one in particular, I've dealt with a client that went through this. They passed in December, hooray. What I've seen a little bit of friction on is we put various things in there. So our client, they have stuff. So all of the server exhaust comes in, it's all organized. It uses machine learning to say like, oh, that doesn't look good, and creates alerts and things. And since a lot of these systems will generate alerts, a lot of policies will potentially treat an alert as a security incident, right? And so a security incident means, pull all these people together, have a meeting. What was the root cause? Why don't we want to do this again? Yeah, like massive time suck. And we purposely adjusted their policies and things to say, look, alerts can come in. That's fine. All alerts will be evaluated. And then if they need to be a security incident, then they will be. And we will follow all of these processes to help save some time, because many of them are still kind of a false positive.
Right.
And the system that they use is very robust and will it's milliseconds, right? Everything runs at the speed of your computers, right? So it's seeing things very fast, and therefore you can have a much higher degree of confidence that if it says, gee, Matt doesn't, there's potential data exfil going on here, you have to look, right? Because it's not just throwing an alert at you because there's some poorly architected rule framework that says more than 10 megabytes can't go from this thing to that thing. Right. It will actually sit there and say, this computer on a Tuesday at this time usually only does this and talks to this. So then when they start talking to other things and different ports and other things start happening, then it becomes the pattern has been violated. Let's take a look at this. And so these tools are quite helpful. Now, SOC comes into the client. They kind of pushed back. And we said, so the SOC protocol, if you will, if you wanted to break it down, are these like monthly meetings, right? And so you're supposed to like do your external scan and internal scan, do these vulnerability scans. Like this client, they run it every week and it's constant. Every new thing it's scanned. All outside it's scanned. And so the data is all pulled together. And so you don't really have to look at it until some alert kind of flows up from one of those things, right? And consequently, they don't always we don't really have a meeting on a Tuesday every month. So you can go to look at these meeting minutes because it's all the time. It's just constant. And so that's kind of this mind shift for the auditor and you. So when you get to this like highly automated space, you're going to have to bring the auditor people up to this. And they love it actually, because you can run all these reports and they can see the things that they can see. And you say, it's always there. Like, we don't have to call a meeting. We don't have to scramble, go get a report from this thing, put it into Excel, go over here, do this, try and put these things together, sit in a room and pontificate. But when the stuff is running like a top, you really can focus on what you're supposed to focus on, which is delighting your customers. Because I've never once been in a situation where, if you take like a hospital, like no patient I've ever heard of said, oh, I'm going there because they're high trust certified. And the hospital is not. No patient knows. No doctor knows.
It's not core, exactly. And that's the challenge. It's not core to your business. It's not core to what Rhyno does. It's not core to what the hospital does, but it becomes an important secondary function. So, we already hit 30 minutes into the conversation, and as you and I were joking about before, this one could probably go for a couple hours if we really wanted it to. We'd end up going from coffee to shots later on, I'm sure. Let's jump into the manual versus automation a little bit. I think that's something that goes back to the question earlier on. As we all did this manually, and even we've done it manually. You go through and you fill out the forms and you wrestle with them and you file them away. And to your point, and you go, oh, good, I'm done for the year. I don't have to think about this for 6 more months, and you walk away from it and you're happy. Why is that no longer sustainable in a manual format? And how does the lack of automation impact that? Because then we can start talking about some automation opportunities that happen after that.
Yeah. So you have to start somewhere, right? And if you don't have a process, you're going to have to put one in place. and actually go through the motions. So if we're going to stick, I do a lot of things in healthcare IT, you do too. So I'm going to kind of stay in that space. We do work in a few other areas. We're in the financial capital of the planet. We're aware of the banking things, but I'll stick in this particular area. By law, in HIPAA, when they changed the law with the High Tech Act 2009, you have to have on file a security risk audit every year. And the principle of the company, like in, well, maybe people don't know, but HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act, right? The little A, that's where some of this stuff comes from. But all of it really created COBRA so that if you're leaving your company, you can keep your health plan. That's really what that thing created, right? In the accountability piece were some stipulations that said hospitals, mostly hospitals, you have to protect this information. So it's kind of our first real privacy act in America, right? It's 94 something, Bill signed it, 96, I think.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I can remember when it was signed. It was the rules have been refined. And so if there is a disclosure event, right? Well, that's where business associate agreements came from, right? Yeah. So before, let's say 2009, 2010-ish, if you, the vendor, had an oopsie, the hospital had the problem, right? The hospital was the covered entity. And so you made the boo-boo, they had the problem. BAAs say, no, now you make the mistake, you have the problem, right? Yeah. Insurance rates go up. And no hospital will let you in there unless you sign a BAA, right? Because they don't want the risk. Yep. I can understand that. Understand what you're signing and understand what you should have in place, like, i.e., am I touching PHI? Because if you're not touching PHI, you better plead your case to that hospital. They're like, I don't do it. I don't want to do it. If I have to do it, I'll talk to you, right? Like, and then don't sign that thing. But let's assume that you're going to potentially touch PHI. Which you have a high standard that you have to meet. And if you don't do a security risk audit, like, so you all of a sudden are a hospital, right? You might be a vendor, you do this, you do that. Not under the law, you're now a hospital, because that's what these rules do. They move all of that down to you. So you now have to think, like, I got doctors, I got nurses, I got patients. And you have to think about this that way. And if you don't follow some of those things, you have the boo-boo, all right, your insurance is going to kick in potentially. There's problems there, but we won't worry about that. You might lose that client as a client.
Yep.
And they have rules that say that they're going to label and shame you, right? And you might have to go, if you lost 1,000 records, that's the federal threshold. So if you lost 1,000 or more records, you have to call up media. That's a federal rule. So you're calling up Channel 4 and you're saying, me. And they can decide if they want to write an article. And you have to alert all of those people that you impacted, right? Yep. So you're going to have their address and send out the letter and pay for the credit monitoring and the other pieces. So understand.
And we've all gotten those letters in the past year all over the place. I know we've gotten at least 4 or 5 of them from different organizations.
Yeah, I mean, we're a year in, basically, from Change Healthcare was almost a year ago, right? And the problem actually was longer than that. Technically, Change Healthcare was SOC 2 certified. Guess what? Didn't happen. They had really bad processes, but they're certified. And
yeah, well, and that's just it. I think everybody keeps learning based on the events, the most recent events that occur to us. So, and again, we're getting some great comments. Why automate? I think these people are reading our minds and kind of reacting to it. Let's move from the manual to the automation. Obviously, we've been lucky. A lot of the work that we do at Rhyno, we end up engaging in our clients' infrastructure. For example, we got one VDI here, one VDI here, one VDI here, and that used to allow us to get away from this conversation quite a bit. Hey guys, we're not doing anything. We're not storing anything on our sites. We're storing everything within you. We're only accessing your systems through yours. And that worked for a long time. That worked for several years, but every year it becomes more and more complicated. They want more and more. So from a resource burden on our side, we've got to be more proactive about it. And again, Matt's been great on always supporting our team and what we need to do. So how do you build in automation for this? How do you bring it together so it's not something you do in December or January or once a year? How do you build processes in place that allow you to, one, automate it so it's not so burdensome, and two, have a continuous improvement loop as you go?
Yeah. So you're going to have scheduled events. Starts right there. So you would have some way of managing that, some set of, this is an annual meeting, just like you have a company, right? You have to have an annual meeting, right? Doesn't matter what kind of company you have to have it. If you do not, your company does not exist, right? It's out of compliance. That means if you're a limited liability, guess what? You're 100% liable because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And that's, you don't want to find that out in a lawsuit. So you have to have a schedule for certain things. One of them is risk assessment. Starts there, always there. And it's not that hard in terms of what are the risks, like the top of the news is going to keep feeding all the boneheads that are out there. Like, this guy had this problem, this guy, you kind of need to look at that and say, am I next?
What are we doing? Yeah. Are we doing any better or are we worse? Exactly. Are we rated?
Right. Okay. So when you do the security risk audit is kind of stipulated. It says, look, you list all of the potential problems. You say, what is the likelihood? You get to decide. Err on the side of it's happening. And then you look at the impact to you and potentially to others. You multiply. So it's usually a percentage, and then it's like, they're both like out of 100, right? So like the odds of this are 10%. The impact is 100. You multiply it, 10%. Right. So you then, that comes out to kind of a score on a 100-point scale. And you say in your policy, anything greater than 50, we got to deal with. Okay.
But is that something you can determine for yourself, or are there rules and guidelines?
Okay. So there's certain things that are based on firm size. So when you get to 50 employees or more, ONC will say, you are here now, right? So some things you can disregard. Some things are on your purview. There are plenty of things that are not. So there's things in there about information. Like, you got to encrypt the data, right?
Right.
So when you got to know what data is important, then you got to make sure it's encrypted. At a minimum, it's encrypted, right? Because if you don't do that, you are breaking a lot of rules. Like, so, do I have the data? Is it like, do I have the data today? You got to ask that question at least once a year. So you're going to go through these particular processes once a year, just kind of like, where am I at? You're going to set some things in. I like to use a tool called Laserfiche. Its heritage is really document management.
It's a document management tool, right? Okay.
Yeah. But I like it because they don't charge you for the workflow module. I think it's always included, and they have all the stuff on online, and they are big in government. Almost like 85% of your state and local governments run on this thing. So the regulators do this stuff. They know this very well. So, hey, I use Laserfish. Oh, it's the best thing ever. I do this. What'd you do? In there, you just set some things that say, all right, my policy says I'm going to check my access logs every 90 days, right? Like there's some latitude on some, but so you can just set a little rule in there and it'll fire. And then it usually comes over and it emails you a form, and it's a pre-built form. And you say, upload this thing, save. Thank you very much. Move on with my life. So when you get to that potential somebody coming in and auditing you and doing this, it's all right there. It's time stamped. Your policy says this. Here's all your proof. You don't have to go scramble. Where is the evidence? So
that's big.
You put those. Then we build in there a different thing for how do you do a incident, right? And so that one is not time based. That is just event based.
Event based.
And so in that situation, you'd have to have a form. You do the thing, like we had the meeting, it was this, we discussed this is what our corrective action will be. You save it, and then you potentially change your policy. You potentially save something over here, or you have, like, all right, well, it was the third time that Matt messed up with patient data. We have a 3 strike, you're out rule. Matt's fired. And, your policies will say that we turn off access. So you'd have to show that you'd take a little screenshot of Active Directory. Matt's disabled. He's got the sad face on him, and then done, saved, out of the way. So when these things can support kind of how you would normally do things, then you don't have to worry about, where's the proof? Like knock, knock, I'm your auditor. What's going on today? Because it's part of what we do.
So, I mean, this is very interesting. Again, Rhyno, we're a small to mid-sized company. We try to service our clients more than worry about the back office stuff, obviously, but we have to do everything. What does that take? So let's talk about from an implementation standpoint for a moment. We want to automate some of this because some of this sounds very, very logical. The stuff that needs to happen, trigger it, make it automatic, like we do every day. Like we all get automated emails and we deal with them 30 seconds, you move on. How hard of an implementation is this? What does it require? And what's the level of effort? Because I think this is important, and we're going to talk about, you had said in the beginning, you love working with the smaller companies, you try to support them. We're going to talk about auditing and how the companies can learn how to be prepared for audits towards the end of the conversation. How difficult is this to do?
I mean, it depends on where people are at. Obviously, really, like sometimes you got to start with the policy piece, right? But let's assume
policies are in place. Let's assume that.
Yeah, right. So if I was to kind of take your situation in particular, I know you got policies.
How did you know I was asking for us?
I know that those are integrative policies. They weren't, like this thing's over here, that thing's over there. This one's in French, that one's in Spanish. Like, they're all cohesive. They do actually cite certain standards and things that are in there. Like if you just have a policy and it doesn't say because of NIST 800, you're gonna have a painful process. So you have a fairly robust set of documentation that's there. And let's say you have a form, a Word document, whatever it is. It says if we had an event, let's say it's never happened, but you still have to go through the motion of, all right, what this could happen, what would we do, right? So The next steps would be, all right, in the documentation, it says that you're going to do this, you're not going to do that. Let's take like a password policy thing.
Right.
Many times that is defined, you have like Active Directory. Makes it work, right? You can just put the settings in there. Thou shalt change thy password every 90 days. Yeah. You take a screenshot of that thing. All you'd ever do in the future, you get a 90-day email thing. It says, hey, I need a screenshot of this. Open it up, screenshot, save, move on with your life.
Got it.
Sometimes, you have to do that level of checking, because you could do that on like an annual basis and just say, I am going to look, because on your annual thing, what you want to do is review. Is this working? Is this not working? Like if the auditors come in and it's like, yeah, I thought about doing that, but I skipped it last year, you're going to have a hard time, right? You have to do it. And you would have some sort of notes from the meeting that said, yeah, we actually talked about this, and this was our decision. That's fine. That's perfectly fine, right? You can decide, yeah, it's too much work, we're not going to do that anymore in some situations. But there's plenty of things like, well, we're doing the screenshot every 90 days. It's never going to change. We're just going to do that once a year. Fine. You just say you did it. That's all you got to do. Then you'd have to, go change the tickler to make sure that,
right. Then you go back
to Tuesday of this, and it's John's responsibility.
All right. So besides, we talked about document management systems, obviously, and I can see how that workflow works and those triggers. Are there any other tools that can be used for that type of automation for the audience? Because we're at 11:47. Like I said, this is going very, very quickly, and we still want to go into the future of a little bit. So what other type of tools would you recommend?
One I would potentially,
or not recommend, even if there's something you wouldn't recommend.
So in smaller organizations, I would just say somebody is responsible for this. And so you keep it simple. Somebody's calendar is the source of truth for this stuff. I just do it based on like a calendar, really. I just like repeat appointment. What is it? What's the stuff in there? Done, right? That's easy peasy. There are things you can do in SharePoint. That's a pretty workable tool.
I see Power BI just popped up. I can imagine Power BI, Tableau, those types of things can be helpful.
Those things are helpful if you have a lot of streaming data things kind of flowing through a situation. I would definitely look at some of these platforms that are out there. I don't really advocate stuff for like antivirus stuff anymore. Like if you have Windows computers, you have antivirus. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like don't pay $30 a month for Symantec, McAfee, whatever. You're wasting your money. You get,
the
2%.
The core works well. The core works well.
Yeah. And, understand that Windows 10 is going away. Windows 11 has much better kind of safeguards pre-built into that thing.
Yep.
So move to 11. And you would just try to keep it, if it's 15 steps and it's a totally separate system, it's probably not going to work. So I like the stuff with Laserfish because it just, it sends the emails, it's a form. Oh yeah, I gotta click this, click that, hit and submit, move on with my life, right? That I find works pretty well.
Yeah, people can comply to that. There's no issue complying to that. Exactly.
There are other systems that you can create a form with. I don't know if you do Jotform or what others, but it's just have these kind of mechanisms, and the timing comes from your policy.
Excellent. No, I mean, and I'm very excited to hear what you're talking about here, because we do it all manually now. I'm going to be honest. Everything we do is manual, and I would love to get to the point of integrating some of these tools because I'm very much very reactive to my calendar, my email, that type of stuff, and I'm sure everyone else would be. All right, it's 11:50. Let's see if we can bring this home in the next 5 minutes or so. This topic can certainly go on for. What do you see as the future of compliance? Let's just talk about that tomorrow. I'm sure that's more than a 5-minute conversation, but what can we offer up as things we should be looking for in this year and next year?
Yeah, it's more the future of regulation that I see, right? The compliance frameworks many times will follow.
Well, what do you see there? I mean, do you see them growing exponentially? I mean, I sense that it's going to boom like the EMR things did 10, 15 years ago.
The compliance frameworks?
The regulatory.
Oh,
the regulation.
I mean, there's some harmonization around NIST. So HITRUST uses NIST. HITRUST uses security stuff that's in HIPAA. HITRUST uses stuff from SOC. So what they did is they just kind of smush stuff together, and they have 19 domains, and you do this, you do that, yeah. And then you take the test, and they have a website that you have to pay $18,000 a year now just to have your data in their system, right? And then that data has to go in through your assessor company. Like, you can't really do it, but you still pay rent for that thing. And in there will be certain things that kind of like, if it will say stuff that's like, there's evidence. So that the next year when they show up, knock, knock, where's the evidence? You better have that evidence ready, right? Go, here's my report. It's all in this repository. It's coded against, these citation numbers. Here's your access. It turns off in 30 days. See you later. The NIST is showing up a lot because it's kind of a version of that is like the CMMC, which is the Department of Defense thing, which, that one's interesting in that the Department of Defense said, look, you meet this standard. If you do not, no purchase order. And the top level guys can't get the purchase order if any of the vendors are not certified, right? So they make the whole wood pile.
Yeah, 100%. It's not my problem anymore. It's their problem.
Yeah. And CMMC is this controlled unclassified information thing, CUI. So there's a lot of ambiguity. Like, what is PHI, right? Like in healthcare, well, if it's just the name, it's not PHI. If it's the name plus date of birth, PHI. Like we focus on the identifiable thing, right? Like I know that that's Matt. But if it's missing something, it's not PHI. There's ambiguity around that thing, and it's kind of on purpose.
But for security reasons, we tend to always lean to, hey, it looks like it's PHI. Let's treat it like PHI, even if we're not sure.
Yeah, many times that will be.
It's not worth the risk to go the other way.
Correct. Yeah, like you really have to have the documentation that said, why, and you better have, like, under the law, you have to have a privacy officer, you have to have a security officer, 2 different people. Usually they have to be 2 different people, right? You can't be one. Smaller companies, it can be, but you get bigger, no.
You got to separate the duties. And you and I have discussed it even for our company. Who are we going to assign for one? Who are we going to assign for another? Because it's got to be. And one thing for the audience as well, again, we're starting to bump into the end of time. One of the things we want to bring, Matt and I were actually on a call with another company, another potential partner of ours, that is trying to help out the smaller companies prepare for these types of audits. So we're talking about what you need to do in case to have all the details for the audit. But there's, to Matt's point, someone comes in, hey, they want to audit you. Are you prepared for that event? So there are companies out there, and we're actually probably going to have a LinkedIn Live event sometime in May. I guess we're in April now, in May, with a company called Percheron, who does this. And they've been doing this for large organizations for 30 years. Now they want to help out the smaller companies like ours and to be ready for these audits, because everything that we're leading up to, everything that we're seeing is this is going to become much more embedded into your daily life of your organization. It's not, as we said in the beginning, something that you do once a year. It's got to be regular, but you know what? You want to be ready for it. So even when you don't necessarily have the resources to assign a compliance officer or a security officer 100% to this, you need to take the steps to be prepared. And we'll address that in a future LinkedIn Live event.
Yeah. So, the biggest piece that's missing, like from an accounting, you got QuickBooks, right? There is no QuickBooks thing for this that's out there. I just, believe me, if I saw it, I'd recommend it. I'd say buy 10. But these concepts apply. Like, so you don't do QuickBooks once a year. Like, you don't want to
all the time. It's an all the time thing.
Yeah, I'm sending my invoices. Some people it's monthly, some people it's weekly. It's the same kind of concepts that, I'm doing this kind of thing. Why? Access, right? Like, why do you do the QuickBooks thing? Well, I need a bank, or possibly I need a loan.
Yep.
If you want access to clients that are certainly of the larger variety, this is foundational. And then, unfortunately, it used to be you could be small and work with those guys, but they're getting lots of pressure from the top. And I saw this in the automotive days, right? So QS 9000, the cars weren't, the big three, they still weren't making great cars in the 90s. They got certified and like, woo, we're quality, to try to compete against the Japanese, where the Japanese, it is like Toyota's system is constant, right? Like if something bad happens, they shut the line down. They're like, whoa, what happened? And they ask the 5 whys, right? Like why? They try to get back to that. That's different than, and I'm not saying that you do that kind of stuff, but the response was, we got this framework thing. And then I worked for a tier 1 and tier 2 supplier. We paid the cost, right? So they always made the framework easy for the top. And then they made all the money on everybody in the wood pile. That is going on in High Trust. That is going on in all of them. So it's coming for you. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just saying it's there. It's not going to go away.
Listen, you know me, Matt. I've ignored this for as long as I possibly could. When we've talked about this for 10 years, and I was always like, "Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it." And in the past couple of years, we've become much more serious about it because of the clients we have. And you're actually making me think that, to your point, just the way you handle your invoicing, the way you handle your clients, your marketing, your sales, this has to become just as regular to it. So I really do appreciate that insight. It is 11:58. That hour flew by. I hope everybody got something out of it. We do have one LinkedIn user that put some amazing details into the chat, the comments. We'll probably try to grab those and somehow put them out there with our presentation at some point. So we thank you for those. We hope we answer some questions here, and we're going to have some future events. We have our next LinkedIn Live event is going to be on April 18th. We're going to talk on two sides of the governance versus the architecture. We're going to have 2 people who are experts in each on the event. And then sometime in May, we will talk more about auditing. So I want to thank you all for your time. Matt, thank you very much for your expertise as always. We appreciate it. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.